welcome, first of all, Dorothy Willis, who's a regular participant. I'd like to introduce my pussycat, whose tail occasionally pops up in front of the webcam. And most particularly, I'd like to welcome Sheryl Willis, who is a deputy principal in a special needs school, and will be giving some specialist answers to our question, which is all about special needs kids and adults in church situations. Simon Williams will be able to post some live questions in on air, and we'll take it from there. So let's have a little bit of background to Sheryl and Dorothy. Over to you.
Who's going to start? Shall I go first?
Great.
Hi everybody, my name is Sheryl and I live in Papatoetoe in South Auckland. Originally hail from the deep south in Riverton. I've been working in South Auckland as a speech language therapist with children with special needs for about 19 years now, and currently I am deputy principal at a special school. And the special school, we have students aged from 5 years through to 21 years of age, and they're students that have been identified as having the highest need for special education in New Zealand. So, yeah.
Great, thank you for that. That's a pretty rich able to ask and answer some of the questions that we've got tonight, Sheryl. So thank you very much for coming in. And Dorothy, how about you? You might have an interest in special needs too.
Yeah, Dorothy Willis from Riverton, and yes, I have an interest in special needs, a practical interest, because it's affected my life quite drastically for the last 27 years, and it's really brings the whole gamut of special needs and everything that happens into a rather sharp learning curve when it suddenly happens to you, when up till then it's only happened to everybody else. So right. It's a real...
So from being totally able-bodied to really confined to the wheelchair.
Yeah, I walked on a tripod for about 5 years, and then once one leg had to be amputated without any balance, so I had to resort to a wheelchair to avoid taking more than 12 tumbles a day, which was causing injuries in itself. So yeah, it's been probably about 20 years in a wheelchair now. This is my third. I've worn out two.
Yeah, so. Goodness. Okay, so thank you both very much for being in, and I'm going to bring up a screen share now, which is the questions for tonight's live on air. And we're going to try and deal with all of these questions in our 40 minutes, so it's quite a bit to get through. And I'd like to first of all ask Sheryl, what are the most important things that you think we could, as a church, a congregation, whether it's at Riverton, wherever, regard special needs adults and children? Any comments about that?
I think probably the most important thing to do is to make the church accessible and also to make it very welcoming for people with a disability. I think for a lot of people who have a disability, it's a real challenge going places. So to get ready in the morning and to get ready in time to go to church and then to arrive at church, it needs to be a place where they feel accepted for who they are. I think it's really important to get to know the person, to look past their disability, and to look at who that person is. I think with a lot of people with disabilities, we often make assumptions about what they can and what they can't do, and I think we need to spend more time talking with them and finding out what they need, what we can do to help and support them, and how can we make it so that they can be active participants within the church and the activities that the church is doing.
Okay, that's really helpful stuff, because it's taking it away from looking at the disabled person as if they were just going to recipients within the church community. You're really suggesting we need ways of encouraging activity and participation rather than assuming what can't be done.
Oh, are you there?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. You lost my voice, yeah.
Yeah, I did. There's a little bit of feedback or something.
Oh, that's a bit of a shame. Okay. Is that a little better?
Yep, that is. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that. What I was just suggesting, Sheryl, was that we need to treat differently abled people as participants rather than as passive people in church.
Definitely, yes. I would totally agree with that. I think of the students that I've worked with as I've been a speech and language therapist, and sometimes they have everything done for them and to them, and people don't expect them to be able to communicate or to do things for themselves. And I think, there's students, children and adults who want to be involved and want to be doing things and just need to be given that chance and that opportunity.
Great. What about from your perspective, Dorothy? How do you see it? What are the important things that we need to do regarding special needs adults and children?
Well, access again for me is the key, and one of the important things for me, which I have to weigh up before I can go anywhere confidently, is can I get to the bathroom? And that is a real biggie, because if you get nervous because you can't think you're going to go, then you don't enjoy the visit at all. And I have twice, it's very hard, particularly from a wheelchair, to open a door outward, and all church doors open out, and then try and wheel yourself through. How are you going to do that? And I've twice had to go home because I haven't actually been able to get in the church at all. So outside doors always need to be left open, even if you close the next door if you can, or have someone there till maybe 5 minutes after church starts, so that they can actually let somebody in that's going to struggle with that door, which is often a heavy front door.
I mean, that's an extremely practical thing that we need to take into account, and I think building codes, by and large, for about 20 odd years have had that kind of compliance built in. But
unfortunately, what they let you do is they let you put a pressure thing on the top of the door, which you can't work from a wheelchair.
Now, there's an interesting point. So that kind of specific thing, there's probably a range of similar things depending on how abled a person is, and it could well be that congregations just have to take the time to sit down and ask the differently abled people in the congregation, what can we do to make this experience better for you?
Yes, exactly. It's something that I would like to see. I mean, August is Disability Month, and I would like to see it on every council meeting agenda for just that month of the year. When they have that August meeting, could they put on the agenda what I know we used to end our old meetings by saying, what more can we do for the work of God in this place, or something like that. If it could be on the agenda of each August meeting, who do we need to talk to that might have joined our congregation lately, or how can we look anew at being inclusive for everybody that might be starting to struggle with how they come and join us in worship?
Yeah, I think that's tremendously important from the point of view that congregations have members that get older and congregations have new people coming in, and we don't necessarily know the kinds of abilities that they bring into the church situation. Now, Sheryl, this you and I have talked prior to the live on air meeting, And I was particularly keen to ask you, what is the range of disabilities that we're likely to encounter in church? What are the sort of hidden factors that we don't look for, that we sort of see past, as it were?
Yeah. I think, well, there's a lot of what you might call a hidden disability, and some of those are your mental health disorders. So you've got people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. So that could be a young child who's unable to sit still for very long times and might get up and jump around, which for some people in a congregation might deem that child to be naughty and the parents not very good parents, but the child's actually got a mental health disorder that they're unable to control what they're doing. You've also got anxiety disorders and depression. Another really big hidden disorder is that of the social communication disorder of autism. That's a big one out there and presents in, it goes across a spectrum, so people present very differently. And I guess then you've got those disabilities that you can see. So you've got your genetic and chromosomal disorders such as Down syndrome. You've got your physical disorders that you can usually see such as muscular dystrophy or cerebral palsy. There's a whole range out there of disability, and I think yeah, it's the hidden ones are the ones that it's more challenging for people because people can't see there is something that's different about that person. And those are the ones that I believe we need to be watching out for.
Right. Sheryl, tell us a little bit about, in your work as the deputy principal of the school, do people come to the school with multiple disabilities? And how do you cope with that?
Well, that's a big question, and the answer is yes, they do. We're finding now that often a child is being diagnosed with one disability and then they're also diagnosed with later. A good example is we now have a lot of students who are diagnosed with Down syndrome. They get a second diagnosis of autism, and then as they're getting older and hitting puberty, we're starting to see mental health disorders. A lot of our students have got intellectual disabilities, and a comorbidity disorder for that is also the mental health disorders of anxiety and depression, and for some students bipolar or schizophrenia. So they come with a myriad of disabilities. The important thing that we do is we look at each student as an individual, and a lot of the students that we have at our school have great difficulty communicating, so we rely a lot on information from their families around how we can best support that young person and the family.
So school is a live-in situation for all of your students, or most of them?
Yeah, we're just a day school, so the students just come to us during the day. It's our hours are shorter than your normal school, so it's 9 till 2:30, but it's a very full-on day for all of our students. We've got about 136 students at our school, and they've all got very high special needs and would struggle at this stage to be in their local school without the adequate support.
Would they also struggle to in a church setting? Would we, it could be that the parents are church people but feel that it's too difficult for them to bring a child to a Sunday worship event?
That's really variable across the students that we have at our school. It's lucky that the school that I work in, it's a smallish community, and so those families that belong to our school that go to church, often they're known quite well within that church community, and so the congregation are quite accepting of the students and accept that they might get up and run around and start screaming and then need to leave and have some time out and then come back in. There are a couple of families who I do know no longer go to church, but that's largely because it's too stressful and challenging to try and get ready in the morning to get out the door to get to church in time. And for one young person, medically, he's too fragile at the moment to actually go to out in the community at all.
So, Dorothy, do you feel that congregations need a bit more formal training in how they might deal with children with special needs in church? Some congregations can do it quite naturally, but I suspect because the majority of Methodist, Presbyterian and Anglican congregations are older, they have a greater difficulty dealing with the sort of difference in worship. Any comments about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I think probably every congregation would be quite different in its approach, and that would depend on any experience it already had. I mean, Ernest and I have been incredibly lucky because the first time we went to lead worship somewhere, we already knew through Sheryl's work an awful lot of what, talking to her, it might be that people could deal with. And we struck an autistic 6-year-old that absolutely loved the pulpit and spent the whole hour of the church service singing almost and yahooing from over the pulpit, which we didn't batter. And the whole congregation was used to him. He was part of their community. It's what he did. And because we knew from Sheryl a bit about autism, we just could go with the flow, never even attempted to use the pulpit, got down the front by the first row and carried on as though he wasn't there. But I remember going home in the car and saying to Ernest, well, thank goodness we knew how to handle that, because there would have been a lot of visiting preachers would have been really wondering what to do that day and how they were going to cope. So I think you can get to a stalemate sometimes through ignorance and through lack of the ability for one side to actually ask the other, what is up? How can we help you? What can we best do? And it's how do we get to communicate with the family and with the young person or the adult that comes in with problems? How do we break that ice to get communication going? To me, that's the important thing. It's sitting down, breaking the ice, and getting that open dialogue that's going to say, we want the best for you. We want you to be part of our community. Tell us what we've got to do, and we'll do it.
Yeah, I can remember back when I was a beginning minister and I was stationed in a place called Ashurst Bunnythorpe circuit in the Manawatu, and part of the duties there were once every 2 months, I think it was, or no, it may have been once a month initially, was to go to the Lake Alice Mental Hospital. Now, Lake Alice is sort of quite, there's a lot of stigma attached to that particular unit nowadays. And as a pretty young and very green, raw clergy person, this was a real eye-opener. And I had two Methodist stewards, parish stewards or circuit stewards as they were then, from the local church at Martin. And they always met me at Lake Alice, and we put together what we could by way of a service that might last 10, 15 minutes maximum kind of thing. And the people that were attending the service, some of them had been hospitalized in Lake Alice, others were prisoners who were serving their sentence there. And I remember a particularly mild-mannered middle-aged man who always played the hymns for me, and it wasn't until probably a couple of years into doing this that I found out that he was there because he had actually murdered his mother and had been judged criminally insane, and had to serve that sentence. I've no idea how long the sentence lasted. Being in that kind of environment as someone coming out of a theological college with a whole lot of ideas about the Bible and preaching the word and so on, and being confronted with just a totally different, people would hop up in the service, go over and light their cigarette off the candles in the altar. So it was at that point that I realized very smartly that whatever the church was trying to do in a worship situation, in that context, you simply couldn't take in conventional ideas. You had to sit down and rethink this from a totally different perspective. Does that make sense to you, Sheryl, as sort of, thinking about the church and being a little bit distant from it, that the church, by and large, doesn't rethink its way into the situation of being inclusive with all these kinds of differently abled people?
It does make sense. And as you were talking, and as Dorothy was talking before then, I was thinking that having a disability can be quite an isolating thing for many people. They can often feel like they're all alone and there's not a lot of support out there for them. And I think the church could do a lot in terms of helping them to actually have social networks and to feel included. And I think to do that, what you've had to do was get to know the situation and the people and change what you were doing to suit that environment. And I think perhaps in our churches we need to look at who our congregation is, and not just those people with disabilities, but look at who's making up our congregation and how can we best meet their needs in terms of what's more appropriate for them in terms of worship and messages and that sort of thing, rather than sticking to what we believe we should be doing and we should be saying, is looking at who's the people that I'm here for, who is my congregation, how can I best support them in their journey with the Lord.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much for that. I'm just aware that we've got 3-4 people watching at any one time, and if those people, they have to have a little bit of a play around. I'm not quite sure how to do this because I'm always presenting and I've never seen how you actually do it from the point of view of watching, but you can toggle on a little matrix somewhere, hovering your mouse around, that will enable you to put a question into the live Q&A chat pod and a comment. And Simon, if you're still with us, you may want to paste in your response about what factors for differently abled kids, special needs kids, that you have to take into account in your high school situation. Now, Simon is a high school maths teacher at Onehunga High School, and I would imagine there's quite a range of socio-economic needs within that school, and that there will be special needs kids placed within, very poor economic backgrounds, and that's another complicating factor. So Simon, if you want to post anything in there, if you're with us, just put it into the Q&A and I'll read it back out to the panel. And if anyone else wants to post a comment or question, please go ahead and do so. Sheryl, we're going to come to the next question for you, which is specifically on autism. And you started your working life as a speech therapist dealing with autistic children. I gather that autism is on the increase, better diagnosis. Will this be an issue that congregations have to deal with just in the normal course of events? I'd like your opinion, and then maybe Dorothy too.
Yeah, you're right. The prevalence of autism is definitely increasing, and I don't think there's a clear reason out there for why that is. It's possibly we are getting better at diagnosing young people and adults the area of autism. I think the latest statistics from America actually say it's 1 in every 88 people has some form of autism. So that's probably got really huge implications for congregations now, because there's going to be a lot more people possibly in the congregation who've got a social communication disorder, such as autism. The terminology is changing a little bit in that we used to have what's called Asperger's syndrome and autism, and they were seen as separate disorders. They've now come out and changed the criteria, and it's now termed autistic spectrum disorder. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the prevalence has possibly jumped up. In terms of congregations, there's definitely going to be more of these people coming through the door, and I guess in terms of what does that mean in regards to the implications for churches, it's quite hard to know because every person who's got autism can present quite differently. There's those who might have the severe autism, and I think the example that Dorothy gave earlier was possibly a young boy who had quite severe autism, and then you've got those who are just a little bit eccentric and perhaps a little bit peculiar, or other people would say odd, that present in our church, and all of those people have different needs. I think the big thing I feel for churches is to actually understand what autism is and how this could affect a person, because by doing that, then the church will be able to know perhaps what they can do to make their environment one that is more appropriate possibly for that person. Things like structure and routine and using visuals, and I think it's great now that a lot of churches are using PowerPoints and putting up key points from their messages, and a PowerPoint is one way of supporting those people with autism who respond and learn best by seeing things rather than hearing. What else can I say? I think because structure and routine is so important for people with autism spectrum disorder, then the church just needs to be aware that if they are making any radical changes to, if it's the environment or the structure of the service, they actually need to let these people know that things are going to be a little bit different, or it's going to be one thing that will create a lot of anxiety and stress, and they may not come back to the church the next Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all incredibly valid points. So there are, because the spectrum is so wide here. What used to, I've had a number of children that were diagnosed as Asperger's syndrome, and the possibility there. There was never any question that they fitted in within the congregation extremely well. But when you get a more severely affected person, it can be a lot more difficult. But Dorothy, the question that when you had that experience with your preaching on a Sunday, you, because of your prior knowledge, coped well with it. But the really fascinating thing was that the congregation knew exactly what was going on and they worked around it. So in a very real sense, some congregations can work with children with autism. That's your experience.
Yes, and I think it would, because it was typically rural and country, a small rural and country, and part of that particular country community, not a big city place. So the family were known, child was known, they were all being supported, and nobody batted an eyelid. So it was over to us to not batter an eyelid either. And yeah. It was an interesting experience, and I'm quite sure that as the time went on, we too, even in that one initial visit there, were very quickly learning how to just blot it out and blot out what was happening and carry on. So you did learn to refocus.
Yeah, and the reality from a preacher's perspective, whether it's a clergy or a lay preacher, that what they're dealing with, they're trying to get a message across, but we have to tailor it to the context that we're in. And so you went expecting one context, but we're actually confronted with a different context. And that's the skill of the experienced preacher, isn't it? You adapt to the local circumstances, and I think that's terribly important.
And I think you have to learn to do that in the country, because we had a count up at one stage and we had led worship in 35 different churches around Southland, and every one of them different. So we had already learned adaptability, I guess.
Yeah, and many preachers don't necessarily learn that. The fact that you're constantly travelling around that, well, it's a huge Southland circuit, really, isn't it? From the bigger town in Invercargill through to very small places. I'm trying to think of Nightcaps. Nightcaps must have been one of the smallest places to preach in.
Nightcaps and Clifton away out towards Tuatapere and places like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's come to the final question on the sheet, because I think for the three of us, we're all used to dealing with difficult situations, and I thought it would be quite good to talk about what we've found most rewarding and most challenging in dealing with special needs. And I wanted to keep it as broad as possible with special needs. It could be blindness, it could be emotional disturbance, it could be just a person overwhelmed by loneliness or grief. So let's start off with you, Sheryl, please. What's been really rewarding and what's been really challenging?
The most rewarding thing for me has been seeing the small steps that the students have achieved. A small step for somebody with special needs is sometimes it's actually a massive step for them. It's taken a lot of hard work, it's taken a lot of determination, it's taken a lot of effort by the student, the team who's working with them, and the family. And so seeing those small steps is just huge. For example, it could be a student with cerebral palsy who's in a walking frame and for the first time independently moves one of their feet forward. That's part of walking independently for that person, and that's so rewarding. And I guess the lovely thing about working in a special school is we have a lot of those situations which we celebrate hugely with our students and their families. In terms of challenging and dealing with special needs, I think probably the most challenging thing, there's probably two. One would be people's attitudes still towards people with special needs. There's such a lack of understanding out there still, which is really challenging, trying to break down some of those barriers and supporting people to actually learn about something that they are possibly a little bit scared of and don't really know anything about. And the other challenging thing for me now that I'm in the position of deputy principal is trying to support families and getting the right support for them outside of the school environment. There's a lot of support for them within the school, but in the home it's often quite hard for them. It's a very stressful home environment for a lot of families with children with special needs. So trying to get them respite, trying to find appropriate carers for the young people is a huge challenge. When we do, it's great, but it can take some time to find the right people in the right organisation and the funding.
So has it? You started as a trained speech therapist, would you have ever have thought when you were starting out that this is where the path would take you?
No, I had no idea. I probably thought I would be a speech language therapist for life. I loved being a speech and language therapist and working with children with communication and swallowing disorders. And the chance to move into the deputy principal position came along, and I saw that as an opportunity to become a leader within the school and to be able to support and grow our teachers to, provide the best service that we can for our students and their families. So it's very exciting to be in this position. I think I feel I made a difference as a speech and language therapist, and I think as deputy principal I've got a chance now to make a difference in a different way.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I think what a great response. Dorothy, I don't think you would have liked to have ever thought that you would be in your position with the terrible disease that you have. But it's a fact, isn't it, that despite the inexorable progress of the disease, you have also made it, made the best of it somehow. You've risen to kind of overcome, I think, one of the most terrible conditions that I've ever heard about, and you've shared some of that journey on the, in our lay preaching courses and all the things that you've been doing over the last few years now in Six Senses. So, what's been the most challenging aspect for you as a disabled person?
The most challenging thing is learning how to wait all the time. I think that's probably been, when you are able-bodied, and I certainly was in terms of being able to help on the farm, go outside, deal with the kids. Plus, I was already a secretary at the college before this all happened, and that was a pretty busy lifestyle. And then suddenly everything does come to almost a halt and you have to find another level. But learning how to wait all the time and learning patience, because often you just couldn't go off and do what you wanted on your own. And learning to go from having an active lifestyle to quite a passive one in comparison. So it really does turn your world upside down. And I was still another 14 years living on the farm in a 3-storied house with 14 stairs to the bedrooms. So, and
that would have presented a challenge every time you wanted to go up to the bed.
Absolutely, up and down. I think I killed about 3 luxes, losing them overboard, and various things like that. So yeah, there was hardly a day that you didn't come up against challenging things. But learning to wait and learning the patience to wait without getting angry and cross and frustrated, which didn't do you any good. So there's a sense in which you have to learn to try and cultivate almost a personality change within yourself, or you make everybody's life around you miserable. And there's many a time you've got to take stock and say, I've got to wait. It doesn't matter if I don't get that done. I can't expect somebody else to do it now. It won't matter. So that was probably the most challenging things I had to learn. And I'm probably still learning that.
Well, I think from the church's perspective, from my personal perspective, what you've overcome has been absolutely incredible, particularly in terms of the pain factor and so on. And it was part of this that said, this is one of the reasons why you've got to be given that award of community theologian within Six Senses, because some of the, let me put it this way, some of the most rewarding theology that I've read in my life has come out of your theology of living with that condition out of a wheelchair. And when people can rise to that occasion, it's on the same level as a Viktor Frankl or Jacques Lusseron, you know, what one sees with our eyes, etc. So I think there's just so much that when we're dealing with difficult situations, that ordinary, well-able people could turn to people like Dorothy and just learn so much. I would like Dorothy to read this to you. This is the second page, and I'll post this out as a PDF. I think Simon has indicated that he's going to email me his responses, so we'll get them out through the Six Senses Forum. But the second page of the PDF is Julie Thornleigh, who's another person that I've known. She's at the Remuera or Oraki congregation, and she wrote this piece for me. Julie was born with cerebral palsy and has lived a lot of her life from a wheelchair, and yet she sees with the vision, same vision that you've got, Dorothy, that defies the evidence of life alone, sight alone. Now I'm going to read what Julie wrote. I've found God in several places unexpectedly, as when I studied biology and different patterns of life, and seeing how each organism has its place, ever-changing, showing the creation of God still in progress. God comes unexpectedly while I'm gazing up at the clear blue sky and listening to the sound of birds, and especially at the seaside. It hasn't always been like this. I especially find God in the love of special friends. And when I hear a waltz, I like to imagine myself dancing with Jesus himself. As I'm wheelchair bound and unable to move my body, this feeling can be quite real. I didn't grow up as a churchgoer, so the journey toward God has been a long one. It was helped along the way by a family of Methodists who adopted me. They didn't preach to me, but it was the loving way they accepted me as a person and ignored my disability, quite often teasing me and gradually introducing me to a community of able-bodied people, so I could feel that I was an independent adult for the first time ever. If this was Christian love, I wanted more of it. I remember being in a home for disabled and attending a local Anglican church each Sunday with a group of fellow residents. We sat in the group at the front of the church, separated from those behind us, and the vicar brought communion down to us after serving everybody else. A teacher from the home also attended the same church, and one day she offered to walk me up to the communion rail. And I knelt at the rail for the first time ever. I felt the glow of God around me with God's presence, a moment I've never forgotten. Even though I'm now in a wheelchair, I still go up to the rail. And finally, I anticipate with great joy the coming heavenly banquet. Where there will be no barriers of any kind, physical, class or otherwise. We will all sit down with those we love, and the presence of God will be there also. Great words. And at the end of this, I will chop the video up and we'll send to Julie so that she can watch and see that she hasn't quite lost the sense of being famous in the Methodist Church. I think inspirational story, just like yours, Dorothy. And I want to say thank you very much for being willing to come in and share with us. And for Sheryl, I think we've got to get you back into another one of these later on where we talk a little bit more about speech therapy, because it seems to me that that's a whole area that could be looked at in congregational life, because it's not just about helping people to overcome physical barriers to speech, there are also mental barriers to speech. And I just say thank you very much to both of you for joining us. We've come to 7:44, so time to close the meeting, and I would like to say goodbye, and you can say goodbye also, and then you just hit the little red leave call button above your head.
Thank you, David. Goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.